Hi, Deborah K here at the beach. I decided to film this episode, not live, but actually to go ahead and just do it with video this time. I noticed with the live feeds there was a lot of interruptions, and I can't really think of any good reason not to just simply go ahead and film one and then, go ahead and actually just like upload it to YouTube, because YouTube's pretty good about uploading episodes. I will admit the nature of the show is kind of sporadic as far as timing episodes, just because I have other jobs and work I have to do. Notably, I'm on OnlyFans at Deborah K, DeborHky. I did go ahead and release a really fun episode today of Simply Yoga with Deborah. There's a special episode I put out as a celebratory episode. I filmed it last night at the beach, and I was just super, super excited about the event just with Russia, that Ukraine finally went ahead and actually went ahead and put in a successful drone strike on Russia in Moscow. And then there's also the fact that, of course, some agreements have been reached this week with Iran, and the U.S. has been able to actually lower gas prices. So there's a lot to celebrate. There's been a lot of other events going on. Here in Michigan, I want to note that I've made a few successful trips back and forth to Traverse City, and it appears whatever wiring was on the highway there has been shut down. So the Albanian terrorist groups were using to, they're supposed to be aligned with Russia, were using to set up what you call like shock operations there to hit people, have been shut down. So currently you can travel back and forth to Traverse City right now, even on a sunny day, without any trouble from other parts of Michigan down 33. So anyways, that's just an update. I also thought it would be really fun to just hang out and put on this same like sort of jacket and top again for this episode, almost like I'm doing some kind of a dress and like stately clothing, just because it's, I don't know, it's probably one of my cutest, most formal two pieces with the top and the little jacket, so just like a fun way of doing things. Anyways, so, but yeah, I was simply ecstatic last night. Some people may not entirely understand that, but I am actually a policy person, published writer on Ukrainian issues and economics, frankly. And really, this process was trying to get the Ukraine to get away from being dependent on the U.S. or other countries and make steps on their own to defend themselves and do what they need to. It's been a really long one, so I was just incredibly excited and happy about all of it last night. And, it's not really normal to think, I'm so happy about this attack finally taking place, but why wouldn't I be with what happened in my family and my mother's life and what happened to my dad? So, that's my perspective, just thinking I felt like yesterday was a really great seminal event. I think historically people will look back on June 18th, 2026 and say that was the day that, somebody actually really figured out how to put Russia in its place and how much work and time that take. And I did work on policy issues on Ukraine when I was in the Washington, D.C. area for over about 20 years. I would say over 10 years, but definitely about 20 years. And the fact that our signal intelligence systems have been hacked on the back end by Russia, that we weren't in control of them, that unfortunately LaBa, CICA, and Accenture and Booz Allen Hamilton hadn't done, we're basically bringing for Russia and China not doing their jobs on those issues, especially Booz Allen Hamilton, which had to be sued for $15 million by the Department of Justice, is exactly why we couldn't offer direct support, ground support to the Ukraine against Russia. Frankly, we have too many people that work for Russia to be in Chinese CCP here in the U.S. So super, super excited for the Ukraine, super, super excited about what happened with Russia. If we're to blame somebody for what happened in Moscow, why don't you blame some of these weird brats that went to Luther College in Iowa, like Colleen Bubb, for example, who openly talked about how she was related to Catherine McGrade and wanted all my work destroyed and didn't want me to have any money. And countless individuals from Russia living here in the U.S. that have labor crafted people and did nothing but create a case for why the rest of us would want to see Russia destroyed or Moscow destroyed, and that's the truth. It is, I had to deal with the bizarre argument when I lived in the D.C. where people saying, well, she just said that to get people to attack it and blah, blah. It's like, no. The kids at that school that were Russian really said that because they were Russian nationalists who had no, felt like the U.S. citizens should be trafficked. A lot of them were in MS-13. Affiliated with the Chinese CCP, and they legitimately didn't value the rest of us and labor trafficked us, and it was a labor camp, and maybe it still is today. I'm figuring it still is. It's lost its accreditation, but it's important to know all that because This thing with Russian aggression and U.S. citizens losing their money and the alliance, our parents in alliance with Iran and Israel, Chinese CCP, Bolshevik behavior in MS-13 has been nothing but a burden and albatross around the U.S. citizenship's neck financially. So this is a big deal. Don't let anybody convince you otherwise. Just moving on, personally, I've been investigating dental floss lately in my continuing search for the best floss. I decided that the mint floss with scope that's out from Oral-B is really good. It's especially good for getting your teeth clean, but like if your teeth are kind of sensitive, you can also do the single strip picks with charcoal. I frankly was a big fan of restaurants and Gaylord, but with the number of hits going in at restaurants lately, like it's that old method that the Sicilians use, but everyone else uses it too, of getting people to eat too much and then hitting them. Like, I'm going to recommend avoiding eating in restaurants at least heavy amounts. Maybe you want to order out food and take it home, but I can't eat that much anyways one time anymore. I'm just noticing strikes have gone up, like even in Traverse City. So it's just really weird. So hits at restaurant seems to be called Sicilian style. But I think the Russians do it a lot. So does MS-13. So fairly ridiculous behavior. Just a fair warning, especially if you're in like Traverse City or Gaylord especially. I don't see it as much like up in Petoskey or some other areas, but I haven't seen it in Elk Rapids. But there's one place in Elk Rapids that's a pizza restaurant you want to be careful about. If you go in there and you eat a bunch afterwards, they'll probably try to strike you. And it doesn't even seem to be like really specific to groups anymore. It's like just some weird behavior they're all engaging in that's really strange. So, I've been warned. I have to talk about the ridiculous UFC party that Donald Trump had at the White House lawn. It was completely terrible. And I think the worst part, though, was that the Democratic Party put Bette Midler forward, and she sang live, which was cool. She at least sang live, right? But her response was that she was this older woman just getting there and being like, "You're a fascist, man." It looked really campy, and I thought it was just mostly meant to be more like a salute to him, or a counterpoint to him to make him feel really cool, and it really didn't get the point across. I was just totally offended by the event amount of money it would cost, but also it was put on by Endeavor Corporation. I hate them. It was a company I was trafficked by. I told you about my story, and the rest of us don't really want to see anything from them. And, you know, he's in a bad position as far as having taken $8 billion for them back in January. So, you know, moving on, it's important to note that Dana White of the UFC came out and said that there would be no more UFC events at the White House, period. So I suppose that's an interesting dynamic there, but I mean, the UFC is a company like under Silver Lake and Endeavor Corp. Maybe they won't always stay that way, but I can see why he said that. It wasn't good for the UFC. I'm personally a fan of the PFL. I also would say that a lot of my music, independent as it is, has been very popular with a number of people in mixed martial arts fighting, and that's probably also the UFC. So anyways, you know, moving on from that, but it just looked like a debacle and a fiasco. And I mean, Melania just looked like total trash at it with Barron. Like, you're online just making fun of the whole thing, but it just really tacky, gross spending. It just looked bad and photoshopped. It was weird. So, yeah. I need to go back to the situation with Becky Traynor, who was at Luther College back in the 1998 to 2002 era. It turned out she was actually married to John Thune at the time. Lied and said she was single at the school and was supposed to be dating Greg Thornton, but he became Dr. Call and hung out with Kim Gills, who's actually Holly Berry, started working in Endeavor Corp and also part of the Booze out in Hamilton. Of course, Kim also lied about her identity and is also the writer of Grey's Anatomy. The reason why I put those all together for you is because Becky made a number of films of other women who were actually labor trafficked at the school and then stuck her face on them and claimed to be a victim of abuse. And she's never, you know, we're calling this the Race for Humanity, which I won earlier this year. This person, you know, in a relationship to John, had a number of people labor trafficked and used the school. This is John Thune, the majority leader of Son's wife. You know, lied about her daddy. She's a computer programmer. She claimed to be Iranian, and then further evidence has turned out that she's actually Israeli herself and Russian, and part of the Russian FSB, and just a hugely racist, like, weird person that had a strong relationship with the Chinese CCP as well. And you just think, who the frick is this weirdo bothering everyone? And that's all she ever seemed to do. And, you know, she came up with a weird story about Swim Fan, the movie, which nobody even probably remembers. And, you know, it was just expecting everyone to pity her, which is typical of psychopaths, but she's just relatively unhinged. And, you know, Senator Thune is having that as his wife, and funding mechanism for him has never really paid for any of it or been responsible. And it's very weird that they haven't been held accountable in a court of law for the messes the two of them have made or what they've done with these bizarre films. And, you know, myself having been put in some of them, and just the bizarre violence and labor trafficking involved in it. It's really unprecedented and extremely psychotically weird. Weird times. I have to note that she spent a lot of time, messing with people's photos. She's made her presence known up here in northern Michigan again, Petoskey. I want nothing to do with her, refuse to acknowledge her. That's just the best way to deal with it. But it's important to know that she's been identified as being Russian GRU. That's not really particularly, attractive. They're the ones that like to mess around with people's photos and do weird crap to them. And she broke into some of mine on OnlyFans. I ended up putting stuff up and then finally just outed her the other day because I was tired of it. On there, but I'm not interested in doing intel by having people Photoshop my pictures. I will tell you there are people currently at DHS, even at the federal level, tracking these issues. I know Esther Stanley Little Bourne pointed out one of them when they messed up my fingers on some pictures and was like, "Uh-oh, that guy's after you again," because there was Doug Fleming had been after me and he messed up some of my pictures. That's what they thought it was anyways. But, by calling out on the show, I ended up putting an end to that. And so I would say the same with her. It's not appreciated for you to hack my photos or try to make your presence known. Obviously, we're not friends. I don't like you. I want nothing to do with you. And, whatever the U.S. legal system gets together to actually kind of punish you somehow, that's great. Really, whatever, guys, gals, whatever. Just whatever. Anytime. I need to also remind you that Megan Thee Stallion is General Gerasimow's daughter. She's someone that's been known to make herself appear to be like 250 to 300 pounds and be blonde haired, blue eyed, and very pale, and then also can show up and look like a black woman. Pretty sure it's actually a dude. But, I don't understand why the U.S. government allows her to go free in the U.S. and do these weird shows with Jimmy Fallon where she cries innocence and makes fun of the rest of us for knowing what she's doing. And I'm not even sort of tired of it myself, in the sense that, I don't have time to watch Jimmy Fallon or a lot of these shows because of these kinds of behaviors. But what I'm also saying is that who the hell thinks they're going to go on Jimmy Fallon and just say they're innocent and they'll suddenly be declared innocent? That's just dumb. And is Jimmy Fallon actually just filming all this stuff in freaking Moscow? What is it? She's got a story out right now that she split with the NBA Hall of Fame. This is Megan Thee Stallion in April 2026. They start dating in July 2025. He's put out a quote that, basically he just didn't like her attitude. Is that what it was? No, I'm pretty sure what he didn't like is that she's actually Russian and really nasty and weird. And she's a daughter of a Russian general. I'm sure he went the hell away from that. That's what I would figure. What was this guy's name, Riley or something? Yeah, I'm pretty sure he just went the hell away from that. It was maybe being labor trafficked himself. So, but yes, last night a successful drone attack on Moscow. It's a pivotal moment in history, and I'm really glad that Ukraine made the decision to carry it out. And I don't want anybody to get confused and think that this was done by the U.S. government or the CIA. They really didn't. I never worked for them myself. I worked independently. In fact, I'm actually an investigator and a journalist myself, and I'm telling you that the decisions were actually made to pull back on the CIA because they were sold to Booz Allen Hamilton back in the 80s because of H.W. Bush's involvement with Russia himself. If it had been left up to the neocons, this attack would never have happened, and we'd all still be struggling with these issues. Ukraine would just be totally decimated by now. So, and frankly, so would the U.S. The neocons have just never been good for us. They've always been cold members. I also have to note that this is all happening rarely as the issues with Iran are becoming resolved. And the U.S., of course, received a number of oil from them. I could count the whole number in the last episode, but a fair amount of oil from them this week, which has led to a drop in gas prices. And it's important to note that apparently J.D. Vance, Vice President for J.D. Vance, is trying to address the issue. you know, there's been a lot of references to like Code Pink, for example, protesting the war, an example. And what I have to remind you with Code Pink is that they were actually invented by Endeavor Corporation for George W. Bush to provide a false counterpoint to people who were critical of or against the policy issues with Iraq, Iraq war. So the Iraq war, obviously Iran's the newest thing. But, you know, false counterpoint, and frankly look stupid. They're paid activists and actors who do this to make the rest of us who don't support these events feel stupid. And frankly, I had to deal with some jerk person saying, "Are you a Code Pink person?" I was like, "No, I'm an actual investigative journalist and somebody who actually pursued these issues, and I actually went legitimately to events and was invited to them. You know, I went to CI dinners. I didn't go to White House dinners. I went to policy events and actually worked on these issues. I ran a very successful blog that the Joint Chiefs of Staff asked me to put together. I had problems with stupid people from Russia and China. And frankly, I was on Hamilton hacking my blog simply because they wanted to control the U.S. media, as all Russia and China wanted to do, and they considered me to be a viable journalist and did that. They really did rape and beat on me to try and accomplish that. So, in this project now this show is actually because the Department of Justice and the former blog, the Joint Chiefs of Staff of our military here in the U.S. actually wanted me to do. And frankly, a number of other independent groups, even other countries in the world. So, you know, no, I'm not a stupid Code Pink person. I actually make it because I think people need the information. There have to be viable reports. We can't have a country simply run by weirdos from New Zealand, Hamilton, Labatt, CSA, Accenture. They're literally raised and reported a pedophile or any kind of bizarre crime, especially in Russia and China, who seem to be obsessed with protecting. So that's where those private security companies have failed us by being too KGB. I also have to note historically that Benjamin Netanyahu looked an awful lot like Red McGuire, the last man who was married to my mom, that last cult ceremony. I'm not sure it was actually legal marriage, but it's through the PCUSA. He was an extremely racist person who hated Jesse Holmes. I thought the U.S. government went ahead and killed him, but sometimes I look at Benjamin Netanyahu and think maybe he wasn't killed. And I say all that in the context that Red McGuire turned out to be Russian KKK, old KGB, as well as a fan of Israel, the Ashkenazi running it, and was actually an Ashkenazi Jew, even though he supposedly attended the PCUSA church. And he was just an incredibly angry, racist man who prostituted and beat on my mother, and she finally died in 2001 on his way to helping plan 9/11, which is apparently also put together by the Taliban, which is actually also a communist organization funded by Russia. So it's a large network there that needs to be taken apart of, but I've just seen a lot of misleading information, including Becky Trainer, who was actually turned to be John Thune's wife, claiming to be an Iranian, and then later it came out that she was an Ashkenazi Jew and part of the people running Israel. And before you get confused and start saying, "Oh, it's the Jews," it's like, well, no, Israel is not really Jewish; it's Ashkenazi Russian. It was specifically put together for them. It wasn't put together for us. The rest of us who are actually just of Jewish ancestry in the world. The Mizrahi and the Sephardic Jews are not really welcome there. And we don't practice whatever religion they're practicing, which appears to be a cult. It's a fairly violent, mean one, which has taken up threatening the U.S. over the last month. And you know, there's also a serious issue in U.S. companies changing topics with hiring guerrillas to work with them, who tend to be fairly dangerous, incompetent, mentally ill. Members of MS-13 trying to do Rogware, El Jalisco. Remember I told you about the woman last summer when I was working at the Culver's who would go in every day and freak out and break the Coke machine because she was literally giving a signal to that she was a gorilla. And she did every day, and she kept doing the snar signal, and it comes up David Berkowitz guerrilla group, it's Russian, and would just freak out and want to break it every day, and she cost the source a bit of money, and they finally ended up firing her because she kept breaking things. She was a gorilla. Guerrilla. Moving on, Tulsi Gabbard just put out some recent information on Dr. Fauci. I'm just going to remind you, she's not a reliable source of information. She collected too much on everyone else as far as asking them to pay her off, asking for money, creating false stories and obfuscation, and is frankly an employee of Booz Allen Hamilton. And she frankly just engaged in too many money grabbing operations, as well as the terrorist attacks in Hawaii and fires there that led to huge land grabs on the part of people with Russian, FSB, and Chinese CCP relationships and tied to Hollywood. So can't do anything with her information or trust at all. That's not to defend Dr. Fauci. I'm just saying the whole story is some kind of weird bit of gibberish she just started. I need to remind you that former Attorney General Pam Bondi did get herself appointed to a new committee on AI. I would be very curious about that because she's trying to get out some of the security systems, especially at the Pentagon, and she doesn't really belong on those and simply needs to be removed from anything with any position of authority. It's important to remember that she's still in trouble for the death of Aaron Gordon and labor trafficking her and having her organs sold back in Janesville, Wisconsin in the 90s, and is actually a member of MS-13. So, let's see, I think we've covered enough of this stuff. Let's see. I also have to know that the New York Times originally got actually, I wonder if she's actually married to Greg Thornton. We thought he married to this other woman named Melissa Nash, but now with him being so weird all these decades later, you think, oh, Greg actually did marry Becky Thornton, and like, she just plays weird games with Senator Thune and pretends to be his wife. Like, it's really weird. Anyways, not my problem, but it's very strange. I do need to know there's an issue right now with the Senate. The neocons in the Senate wanting to fight with the administration over trying to settle some of the events recently with Iran. Obviously, Israel has signed an agreement with the U.S. on this and decided to threaten us over it. And even began threatening Pentagon officials earlier this month with their demands. And I'm starting to think, it's like, well, so is it Israel and MS-13 that's trying to pull these weird hoop systems on people up here in northern Michigan? Because that's been a problem, and the rest of us simply aren't, going to go along with that. I mean, it's definitely a workplace issue and something no one's going to put up with. We're just simply not going to be, having that. So, sort of important. And I need to note that, the Senate has not expressed appropriate support over ending the war with Iran. There's too many neocons in the U.S. Senate. That was something that was determined during my years in Washington, D.C. Part of the investigation went through is, unfortunately, I had to speak with a number of senators who were people were perverts that were actually so dumb they thought I was like trying to entice them by talking about the abuse and issues I'd gone through, and I was actually trying to get away from really nasty members of the KGB who would actually murder my mom. It's called the FSB of Russia Today, who also happen to have relationships with the KKK and the Chinese CCP. Think they want to help, but instead a lot of them acted like stupid idiots and thought I would try to turn them on with stories of being abused as a child. Dude, who the hell does that? They were all neocons and perverts and just dumb people. And that was a determination about the Senate, that there was frankly too many members of it. Why the U.S. House is more important is because they have more members and more of them that have to be stated because the districts are smaller and they don't have as much power as you said. Or unfortunately, with power goes a certain number of interest in people being pedophiles and trafficking people. So you have a higher number of them that are going to turn out to be neocons, or then going to be into possibly trafficking kids or are trafficking kids. And slavery. It just goes together. It's always an issue with the presidency because it's supposed to be considered a very powerful position. So, when I was dealing with Cersei still, she used to always say she wanted me to figure out who had the most power in D.C. and how to get them. And we just had to tell her, and then like a bunch of us were gathered, myself included, to say no one really does, because power in the U.S. is spread out over a number of groups, so that one group can't simply control everything and simply keep everyone safe. Now, this issue with what has happened in the Senate in the past, certainly some of the rules in the Senate had to be changed as a legislative body. They had to stop being so powerful because there were simply too many of those turned out to be weird neocon perverts, which I've already named in previous episodes. We have Holly, we have Booker, we have Fetterman, we have issues with Thune. It's 4 or 5 guys, big dudes. It's still a problem to have even that many as an issue in this country. So, anyways, so I would also like to note that I became a recent CoverGirl Top 26, CoverGirl 2026 Top 20 round winner for Maxim magazine, and also a winner for the Randall Rose competition for Maxim Top 20 2026 winner. It's just a fun title for that publication as well, an online publication, so you can always go on and vote for me anytime if you like. And that's about it for the show today. So, I hope you're all doing well, and go ahead and blot that down. It was nice to see you all, and I'll see you again for another episode. This would have been, or will be, episode 32. Simply Stated season 5, and it's called Odds and Ends. And I make it simply because I do have ongoing and active stalking issues today from some of these labor trafficking groups and hate groups here in the USA that operate And apparently, we now have rising concerns with Israel being yet another one of those as far as their leadership in this country and their behaviors in it. Since we've had some elected officials that are supposed to be part of our membership of Congress that have actually decided to go ahead and, threaten us of whether or not we support Israel as well, which is just completely bizarre. Weird, but anyways, I think it's been a pretty good week with lots of wonderful successes otherwise and things to be happy about. So that's how I feel anyways. But this has been me, Deborah K, with another episode here at the beach. We'll see you again another time.